Good morning, everyone. Like Hazem introduced me, I am a producer and also presenter here at Al Jazeera English. First of all, thank you all for coming. If you do intend to post on social media today, which I suspect a lot of you will be doing, maybe even taking a couple of selfies on the event, I don't know, please be sure to include the hashtag AJ Tech Summit on all of your posts that you'll be looking to discuss throughout the day. So without further ado, I just want to introduce you to our panel, if you guys want to join us up here. Paul Lee, he is the partner and head of technology at Media and Telecom Research for Deloitte, as we had during our presentation. Hi, Paul. Tom Cotter, he is the Chief Information and Product Officer at MediaWorks, which is New Zealand's largest independent broadcaster in New Zealand. And Ade Granberg, Ade, hello. He's from Sweden. He is the Chief Technology Officer at SVT, which is Sweden's public service television company, which I think also has like the widest ranging programming of all television programming in Sweden. And finally, Mr. Josbert van Nugen from the Netherlands. He is the Vice President of Strategic Programs at Ericsson. So let's just break down for you what it is that we're going to be talking about today. Digital transformation. Paul gave us a really good introduction to that already. But from a media perspective, it seems that the media industry or the media landscape has fragmented enormously, at the same time changed. Oh, my mic just fell there, and never mind. Some would also argue that it's also been disrupted by this new element called digital media. At the same time, we can argue that the media industry has tried to adapt to this changing environment with more of this online audience interaction. But we want to try and understand what exactly is digital transformation, or as you say, the augmentation of digital on traditional, and the technologies behind it that have created the shift to allow that to happen for the broadcast industry. So with Paul, I want to start with you. Following from your presentation, can you just break down for us what exactly is digital augmentation of traditional? Could you just expand a little bit further?
Yeah, so I think one of the best examples of that from a consumer perspective is how you can blend doing what you did before, so consuming television, consuming radio, along with a lot of, let's say, there might be tweets talking about, say, a breaking news story. It may be, so it may be.
I don't think is your mic. Oh yeah, you just need to face the mic if you can.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can do this actually. This might help. There we go. Two angles. I don't think this is working. Sorry, you're going to have to face the other one.
So when a news story breaks, what people are doing, they're still watching news bulletins in the evening, but also what they're doing is they're getting a lot of feeds onto their smartphones via various formats. So for some people, they'll look to Twitter to know what's happening. For others, they'll be looking at broadcasters, existing traditional broadcasters' sites, but there's a whole range of content available to augment what they already have. But have they abandoned traditional broadcast? Some people have, but there's a lot of people who look to the traditional broadcasters to provide them with the sanity check beyond on what's happening.
Right. That does beg the question then, if we're talking about blurring the lines between digital and traditional, do those labels matter anymore?
My view is, I think sometimes I hear digital mentioned so many times in conversations, and every person has a different definition of digital. So often television is referred to as not being digital, yet it's transmitted digitally.
Right.
And in terms of how it's created, it's becoming one entity which can be distributed via lots of different means. So I think there is confusion around the term digital because it's too wide a term, and I think we need to be more specific.
Okay. Now, in terms of trying to understand how people consume on smartphones, which I think is probably the most important thing here, what do you think are the driving behaviors? And this is to everyone. What do you think?
The key thing is availability, portability, to get breaking news, if it's news that they care about. That's the key thing about a smartphone. And the disadvantage of a smartphone is it is small, and it cannot give you a full audiovisual image. And a lot of people just look at phones rather than listen to them.
But you'll use that device when you know, it's the best device available to you at the time. I think in many households where you go to fight for the television at any one time, you know, your big screen experience will always be your preference, but if all you've got left is your smartphone, it's still a, you know, a good enough experience.
And Ade, what about your market in Sweden?
The Sweden market right now turned over since a couple of months ago to be the smartphone is the first device to get news as a news collector for the audience. And that changed the way we work on television as well, because the 9 o'clock news is not about spreading out the news, it's to get deeper into the news and more explainers. So we actually divide our news department as well to an online desk and then a broadcast desk in a much steeper way, I should say, where the online need to be quick and correct, of course. That's another challenge we have. But even the 9 o'clock news need to get more and more deeper into the news, not just telling about the news. It's a big difference going into, especially now when the mobile device, is the first device in Sweden to get news.
Okay, just very quickly, I'm going on to the next theme, but before that, Josbert, can you tell us more about the technological side of live streaming, and how would you consider maintaining some form of consistency when it comes to the telecoms industry and working in broadcast?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about the technology change, but it's in fact also another big change, and that's the change from the communication from one to many and into one to one. We're now direct to consumer companies, and we need to change our organizations to work with that. Consuming media, as we now look in the traditional OTT model, already traditional, we look into a more integrated way of working with operators to optimize how content can be consumed. Ericsson is quite known as a telco company, 100,000 employees, of which 5,000 in media. And one of our products is what we call UDN, Universal Content Delivery Network. And we work with operators to shorten the distance between where we serve the content and where it's consumed. And that's a big optimization for a better experience.
Okay. Now, shifting it slightly, I'm sure a lot of our audience will be wondering more about this impact that it's going to have on broadcasters in particular. So, Tom and Ade in particular, I know that you obviously work in broadcasting. How do you think this has affected the news gathering, the field production, distribution, even satellite trucks in your markets?
It couldn't have had any bigger disruption. So the disruption's already been hit. We're already experiencing it. I do think we're going to bottom out with regards to the decline in TV. I look at Paul's slides. There will be a point at where we still like to sit and enjoy live television together and feel united around it. If we look at our streaming products, 25% of our streams are actually live streams. So people are still wanting to be part of what is happening right now.
So with live streams in mind, how do you work on the production side in terms of thinking about the stronger sort of linear performances in your production lines?
We end up just taking the feed and putting it out to Elemental and getting it out on the internet. I mean, that's things have become more complicated. For the user, for the end user, we're coming back to this, is digital and traditional still the same thing? To the user, they don't care. That we shouldn't, and they shouldn't have to care. They see Al Jazeera as Al Jazeera, .com or on here. It's our role in making it as simple as possible and for being where they want us to be. That is the biggest challenge, and I think what we've seen, roles like mine and roles like Ade's and your role before you moved to Ericsson, where they've actually combined all of the traditional broadcasting, transmission and digital all together. So it's now
can afford it, because you need to spend money on the old broadcast industry still and still afford to move to the digital platforms, and it's quite expensive for us. And the challenge as well as SVT had now is that the old broadcast industry doesn't need to care about the user experience. Now when you go digital, we really need to take care about the user experience as well. That's a new challenge for us as an industry. We need to get a new department for us, and the user experience is more and more important for us.
Now with the user experience in mind, I'm sure Paul and Josbert can both talk about that traditional sort of telecom providers. What do they need to do to cater to those needs now?
Yeah. Content is king. I think still everybody agrees with that, although something going on with content as well. But user experience is as much as important these days, and that's to be found in a lot in technology, but not only technology, in convenience for a user, to work with multiple business models, to easy do a payment by using your fingerprint, but also work seamless between devices, how you can switch from your mobile to your TV set to your tablet without any interruption. That's a very important factor.
Paul, in terms of specific algorithms, is there a way, when it comes to the research of all of this, are you able to sort of figure out personal viewing experiences and what people want and then apply that to broadcasters?
Yes, I think that is something which will be coming through currently and over the next few years. So there are some broadcasters like the BBC which are creating personal portals to access content. And what it may just show is that a lot of people like consuming mainstream content, but it gives people the perception that what they have is a personalized experience with a single logon. And the logon may start off with a smartphone, but it may also extend to television as well. So in the way in which television is presented to the individual. But generally what we're seeing is, say even to get proliferation of apps, which is yet to happen, then whoever picks up a device or gets close to the device is shown whichever app suits whichever news service that they like. So there are lots more algorithms coming through, and the best way in which they're delivered is where they are invisible to the consumer.
Right. In terms of putting things into practice, all three of you have had broadcasting experience. Has anything like that been put into practice already in your networks?
From my perspective as well, to turn over the people that are employed at SVT to a software industry, from a hardware industry, from specialist to generalist, and have that transformation done with the people working at my TV station actually, and to understand where we're heading. That's the biggest challenge right now to survive, I should say.
Yeah, and for us, this point of not wanting to own the commoditized technology and moving. We're at a transition now where we're moving from traditional boxes and cables to virtualization into the cloud. We're ready to look at outsourcing some of this, but I think it's just possibly a little too early. So we're just waiting for that to settle down to see where we actually can place our bets. Advertising is going to be a challenge going forward. The proliferation of different devices and how do we actually get to them? How do we create the UIs for them? How do we get security, analytics, advertising to all of those products? And you're right.
Fit that in the budget as well.
Yeah, and in the budget. And maintaining this view of coming back to your original question of digital versus traditional is just reminding that they're interdependent now, and reminding the executive or reminding the board that the business case for digital is not always crystal clear. It's not always about the revenue. It might be also about the brand. It might also be about, if we're not here, we'll never have a foothold in the future. So becomes a belief set business case rather than here is exactly where your money's going to come from.
Okay, and finally, before I take it to the audience, what are your forecasts in the next 5 to 10 years for the broadcast industry? Will we be actually talking about digital and traditional, or do you think we'll have a completely different term?
Nobody will know the difference anymore. If I look at children, they already don't know. Of course, live will be live, but TV and devices, it's all going to be merged, and the consumer's in control and can watch all the content in the way he wants at any time, the way he wants and where he wants.
And I think 5 years is too long time to think. I think it gets shorter and shorter. I think we need to personalize, to work more with the big data and metadata, and be where the consumer are, and work more with user friendliness, UX internally and externally.
Okay, and very quickly, Tom and Paul.
I think the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed, and people. What can't I get on any device already across any network? We're already seeing a lot of it, but it'll just become cheaper to deploy, easier to build. And your teams will get younger and you're more cross-disciplined.
I expect there'll be a lot more collection of data, and so the understanding of what people do after they watch a TV program 6 months later will be there and will be assumed. So the connection between viewing and digital behaviours or even physical behaviours
Already
will be a lot stronger.
Okay,
I
brilliant.
might
Yes.
also have a heart attack in the next 5 years as well.
Let's hope not. All right, let's take it over to our audience now. I think we have our microphones. Lovely microphone colleagues, where are you? I don't see you.
One
Okay.
over there.
So we think we have about 8 minutes to ask a couple of questions. Please stand up and introduce yourself and let me know who you would like to target your question to. Lady in the white. Please see if you can get a microphone to you as quickly as possible. Or if not, then maybe
One
just
just over
ask and
there.
I can repeat it. Go on.
Because I've been to Africa and I've been in places where they don't have even cell phone, normal cell phone connection. So I think the first thing we need to bridge is this technology gap around the world, because we have still people who don't have 4G, who don't have 3G. They don't know what is digital anyway. And I think it's not really a concern for local media, but because local media, they manage it differently, but more a concern for channels, international channels like Al Jazeera. So within the digital transformation, I think we should take that into consideration. I have a question for Mr. Lee. You said that I wanted to know if you have any studies that show how much would a user accept to pay for news. When you said about making it easier to pay and get an article, I really want to know how much do you think people, on average, are accepting to pay for news, especially now that they have free media everywhere. And I also wanted to know, are there any studies that are showing people between 18 and 34, where are they moving after this age section? Are they moving more towards TV? Are their eyes tired? Are we moving in technology into more hearing than reading? I would be interested in having something that would read for me the articles instead of reading them myself. And yes, if we can talk about how we can manage this technology gap within the coming years,
Okay.
if anyone has any idea.
All right.
Okay, so I think there's 3 questions there. So around the technology gap, there is a profound technology gap. Over the last few years, it's become wider. There are about 5 billion people who don't have a smartphone in the world. There's about 2.5 billion who do. And when I look at, say, connectivity, in most markets, the decile which gets the best connectivity has 10 times the speed of those with the lowest performing connectivity. Now, that varies a lot by country, but across lots of Western Europe, that is the current reality. A lot around the US, you get really high speeds and very low speeds. And the challenge is, how do you address that gap and still make a profit on addressing that gap? With regard to, so there was also a question around what do people do when they grow up? So the 18 to 34-year-olds when they become older. So one big influence is stage of life. So I expect over time, consumption of television will decline, but it will take decades for that decline to become really, really significant. So people who are distracted a lot by smartphones will remain so, but when you think about, and when people have a family, so if I look at the UK 18 to 34-year-olds, those who have a family watch twice as much TV as those without a family. And it's because you have less income, you are more tired. So it's part of the inevitability of that particular context. And there was a third question that you had, but I'm afraid I don't
Text to
recall.
voice.
Oh,
How much
yes.
they're willing to spend.
So are people willing to spend? In Western Europe, I expect they would pay similar to what they currently would have paid for a newspaper. So a lot of consumption, if you look at, let's say, the pricing of content when you move it online, it remains similar. Sometimes it's higher. So with music, when you pay for music subscriptions, you're paying far more than people would have spent on average on CDs. For games, in some it can be way, way higher, what some people pay for games. Is all content free? I think a lot more content is moving behind paywalls. The New York Times has recently announced it gets majority of its revenue from subscriptions, not from advertising, and I expect a lot of broadsheets will move that way, if not they're moving that way at the moment. And then do people want to listen to news? Some people, sometimes they will want to, so that's one thing that a service like Alexa can do. But for, if you're looking to consume content quickly, then reading is far faster than listening. And there have been services which have been created which turn text into video, but they tend not to do very well.
I would like to support your remark about the internet penetration. Only 30% of the world has access to proper internet. I think as a society we should make it a priority to give access to all of the others as well.
Okay, any other questions? Gentleman in the back.
Yeah, my name is Tembisa Fagude from Jazeera Center for Studies. Well, the first question was covered by the infrastructural investment, the gap that exists particularly within the developing countries, that we don't have an infrastructure that can facilitate the implementation of the new digital strategies that most companies have. Second question, though, which is directed to anyone who will be able to answer, is what mechanisms or strategies are you putting in place to ensure that there is a parallel, continual education of the news gatherers, those who create content, to ensure that they can apply these new technologies that we see being presented all the time? The challenge we find in the field, for those of us who are over 40 and trying to understand what's going on, is the inability to put these applications in place. To use these applications that are continually introduced or that are continually changing all the time as we move along. So I think there is a need for digital companies to implement a continual, sustained, parallel strategy that will ensure that there's an education that takes place. A 101 kind of easy to read documents that can help us transition from what we know into the new platforms, and I don't see that happening.
So, sorry, just to wrap it up, because you don't have much time, can you just
That
summarize
was
the question you wanted to ask?
question.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes.
So maybe first about the infrastructure gap. What we see is that broadcasting companies still doing their own technology, and it's important to work with, for example, preferable Ericsson, but to work together and create shared platforms and use the technology for faster development and make it more cost efficient.
And the journalist question, on SVT, I don't see that we get all journalists educated. I think we are now structured as we put in specialists instead, helping the journalists when they collect the material, whatever they collect, to package for each platform. It could be Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or wherever it suits best, in the way it suits best. So we are actually helping the journalist with experts on different platforms instead of educate them, because I don't think everybody will be educated, and I don't think that we will have journalists that can handle all the different platforms and outputs that a modern TV house today will have broadcasting.
For us, it started with the leadership. So our chief of news is actually the ex-editor-in-chief from 9MSN, which was the Australian, largest Australian news portal. So we actually brought him in to drive, our TV broadcasting, our TV bulletins with a digital slant. The second part of it is how do we continue innovation? Example we would use for the VR, we just set up a team, we gave them a time box, you had 60 days, it ended up being 90 days, but we gave out 30 cameras to all the different news crews to see what would happen and look to see if we could seed the behaviours and get it established into the the morning routines of is there a story we're going to be on which VR would suit. So just trying to, rather than making it a large piece of work to try and drive some innovation, actually just give it to 6 people and say, you guys are the bastions, see what you can do in 90 days and come back to us.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up? No? Very quick, lady in the white.
think, what do you think the role of TV can be? When Mr. Lee said that a telephone might be able to write the news, are we as media leaders thinking of what role as journalists we can have in the future? Like for me, are we moving towards considering the digital information as sources and then we do our job from this angle, or are we considering them as citizen journalists and in this case we don't have to exist anymore? So.
Artificial intelligence is not capable of making the difference between real news and fake news. So I think the role of the media and the journalism will remain very important regardless of all the technology developments.
All right. I guess that's it. Just want to say thank you so much to our wonderful panel for joining us today. Mr. Paul Lee from London, Tom Cutter from New Zealand, Ade Granberg from Sweden, and Mr. Josbert van Rooyen from the Netherlands. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting discussion.
Thank you.
And thanks to the audience also.